welcome to the HR Leadership Collective's first Table Talk. Yay! Sponsored by Dwennimmen Leadership. I am Tamara Dixon. I am a very seasoned HR and diversity, equity, and inclusion professional, and I'm also a co-founding partner of Dwennimmen Leadership Consulting. Hello, ladies.
Hello.
Welcome. Love for
Thank
you all to introduce yourselves for our audience.
Okay, so I'm Jennifer Fairweather, the other partner of Dwennimmen Leadership Consulting. I've also worked in human resources for a very long time, and I love working on leadership, HR consulting, organization development, and all things about employee engagement.
Hello, I'm Mary McLaughlin Davis, and I'm President CEO of McLaughlin Davis Incorporated, a long-term organization effectiveness firm, and we consult with businesses in many industries to help the organizations become more effective.
I am Nina Rose. I am a long-term HR professional, although not as seasoned as these ladies, and really thrive in organizational effectiveness and development, leadership development, and overall development of culture. Organizational culture is also just overall really important. So thank you so much for having us.
So happy to have you all here today. In your introductions, you talked a bit about leadership, development, culture, and something I've noticed, and I'm curious if you've noticed, that sort of impedes having a healthy culture is this notion of civility and incivility in the workplace. Have you all experienced that? Know what I'm talking about?
No.
A little bit.
So would love to have a conversation today about that, civility and incivility in the workplace, what it is, how we've seen it manifest, and what we can do to help organizations sort of reel that in so that we have more of a civil workplace versus incivil. So first question, what do you all think are some of the common signs of incivility in the workplace, and how can we help leaders or managers identify when incivility is present?
I think it's actually first and foremost, it's such a old school term, but really coming back into our language and helping team members even understand what incivility is. I think we have often looked at behaviors as, oh, that's just really being rude, or this person is taking credit for a project that I've worked on, and team members themselves don't even recognize that that is incivil behavior. And so really being able to say, for our team members, but also our team leaders, how can you be the voice? Like, how are you stepping in and actually helping individuals take accountability for their own actions, and naming it in the moment? And I think that can be really difficult for people.
Can be. Dr. Mary, what have you seen in terms of incivility?
Well, I think one of the things I've seen often is people who are very self-centered and how they are dealing with their day-to-day relationships within the workplace. It's about my way of doing things. My thoughts are most important. And to start to helping people to start thinking about the team, the organization, how do they contribute to the well-being of the total?
Yeah, that's good. What about you, Jen?
I sometimes feel like I see a theme in workplaces and even just in our community culture where people aren't valuing people as humans. They talk about other people almost as things, as a us against them, as a my team versus this team, my department versus that department. And it seems like, once you take that human equation out and you start thinking in terms of almost like winners and losers, us versus them, then it's really easy to talk about people in a way that doesn't value individuals. It's more about a competition. It's more about, like you said, what's in it for me. People are not concerned about the culture, and that's what I feel like it's kind of part of our overall culture. But of course, it's seeping into our workplaces, and people are losing that value of, you're not just talking about work, you're talking about a person. And people seem to have lost sight of that.
Yeah. Nina, you mentioned the term itself being sort of old school, but I think there's some behaviors that seep into the workplace that people don't realize is being incivil. I mean, gossiping, interrupting people when they talk, dismissing others, all of that is incivility, and I think we have to call it out and name it when we see it. So, if you want to start with you, Dr. Mary, with this question, how can organizations create that culture that really promotes civility, but also that allows employees to feel safe in addressing incivil behaviors?
I think one of the most important things is to set standards up front. That's where leadership comes in, and if the person in a leadership role is not modeling behaviors that are acceptable, then other people think, well, it's not real. It's what she says, but it's not what she does. And we're seeing in the environment right now where it's very difficult to see people having empathy for others. And I think that that's an important part of staying in a civil work environment.
That's good. What about you, Nina? What do you think? How do we create a culture that promotes civility?
You know, I think about we have the term, treat people like you would want to be treated, and I think it's really about treat people how they want to be treated, right? I think simple things such as gender pronouns, controversial, yes. However, if I've said this is how I would like to be addressed, then address me as such, not because you have feelings about it, but because this is my request. And so I think that we've got to really anchor back to when we treat people the way that they want to be treated, then we start to create that common ground of just mutual respect.
Yeah. What do you think, Jen?
Yeah, I think, to Dr. Mary's point, it's got to be part of your organizational values and standards, and you can create those, but you have to do more than that. When you're hiring people, are you trying to reinforce that? Are you hiring, and interviewing and saying, these are the values we're looking for, this is what's important? And when you're onboarding employees, are you reinforcing that? Are you reinforcing that throughout that employee life cycle? And then, the second part to your question is where people feel safe addressing the behavior. That really speaks to, you have to do those foundational things in a culture, like building trust, like allowing for employees to have safe spaces where they can talk and share their experience and feel like someone's going to listen to them and that they're being heard. So all of that, I think, are some of those foundational organizational behavior elements, that you talked about, that we have to work on to make sure they're in place so that we set the stage for that environment where people will value how other people want to be treated, and it's not, oh, I don't agree with that, so I'm not going to do it, but it's like, okay, I value you as a member of this team, so if that's how you want to be addressed, I will do it because I value you as a person.
And making employees feel safe is a huge responsibility for leadership. I remember years ago watching a video when the three of us were in an organization together, where a CEO of a company gave every employee in that company permission to correct him when he was wrong. And that was huge for that organization because that ultimately made the employees feel safe. So when he did do something wrong, they were able to go to him and say it. I think leaders as a whole need to adopt that sort of mentality and not think because they hold a certain title that they can't be corrected or they can't be nudged when they maybe do something that makes employees feel like they're being treated a certain way. So that's huge. What sorts of strategies do you all think leaders can use to address incivility without sort of alienating certain members of their team? Maybe those who are being incivil. What's a strategy they could use?
I think one of the things is to have people know that you value what they're bringing to the table. And one of the things is to have things that you would say, that's really a good idea, Jennifer. Thanks for sharing it. And so the person who might think, oh, here she goes again, they realize that that's not going to be acceptable in this environment. And so reinforcing those values on an ongoing basis is an important thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. What do you think?
I think one of the things, and Dr. Mary, I love what you said, um, creating just the space. We all know people that hog up all the space all the time. And I think it's engaging and leaning in as a leader to say, and so, I haven't heard from you, and your opinion is important, and let's hear what you have to say. So I think it's outwardly expressing that you are literally creating the space for everybody to participate and engage. But even on the back end and in your one-to-one meetings as a leader, it's I think it's asking very direct questions. How are you feeling? How are you doing? What are the things that may be challenging for you? Are there interpersonal relationships that aren't going well? And what's your perspective? And you've got to create the ability to navigate through some of the personalities, and then also really pouring into those individuals to be to have to the willingness to engage in some of those conversations. That's how we can help people feel safe.
Yeah.
That's good. Any other strategies?
I think going back to kind of those foundational aspects, organizations need to make sure they're hiring people who are adept at being leaders to start with. And I think sometimes we hire people who are really good at technical skills, really good at doing the work and answering questions, but you've got to hire people who want to step into that leadership role, because it's not easy. And so, just as both of you mentioned, I think leaders need to reinforce those behaviors they're looking for, give people permission to make mistakes and take risks and speak up. And if you admonish people for doing those things, it's never going to happen again. At the same time, leaders can't ignore when they hear microaggressions or when they witness people being incivil to each other, being disrespectful. They need to lean into that and address those things and call them out to those individuals and say, that's not how we talk to each other here. So I think all of those things are critical, and I love what both of you said, and I love what you said around those conversations with employees. That should be a key part of your role, not just doing the work, but checking in with people and seeing how things are going and creating that safe space to ask questions and get employee feedback.
That's a great point you made, and a strategy I would say we need to employ is addressing instances of incivility in the moment.
Yes.
We talk about this often, how sometimes leaders aren't comfortable giving feedback, and so it's a month later, and then they want to bring it up. Well, it doesn't have the same impact then.
Absolutely.
So, get the tools and put them in your toolbox to be able to address those issues in the moment and instantly, so that you can hopefully change those behaviors. Can either of you talk about an example of when you saw incivility in an organization and sort of what interventions or policies you use to sort of impact that?
It's very interesting to me how people will say, well, I thought about saying something when someone said something that wasn't nice, but they wait until they're out of the meeting before they say that. And so I think that's a time for coaching and reassuring that the behavior that you're saying you thought about is the behavior we'd like to see you exhibit. One of the things also I've used in the past is to send notes to people who speak up. And I have found that people would put those notes on their bulletin boards in their office so other people would see what was being valued in their workplace.
That's really good.
Yeah, I agree. I think standing up for others, and in a meeting, you have those individuals that take up lots of space that might interrupt. And I think it's very much in a subtle way saying, oh, I'm sorry, so and so. This person was talking, and I would really love to hear what they have to say. And again, it creates that psychological safety. It shows that this is important and that person has a voice. And in some kind of way, it checks the other person a little bit to say pause, right?
Yeah.
Like you've got to recognize that this is a team environment. And then post those interactions, pulling them aside and explaining what just happened and how that doesn't align with our standards of behavior. It doesn't align with the culture that we want to build. It's not very inclusive. I think it takes courage. I mean, I think that was one of the things that leaders are scared, to engage in some of those conversations. So it does take courage. But the impact long term, I think, is that person will be mindful of, am I speaking in turn, and am I creating space for others?
Yeah, that's good.
It absolutely takes courage. And I think when we're talking about a topic like this, everybody in the organization is a leader, right? So how do we instill the tool of courage in everyone? So whether it's a training, teaching people how to have those tough conversations. So first of all, something we say all the time.
Right.
If you're a leader, you got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely.
So calling somebody out in the moment is not easy, but if you have the tools to do that, absolutely, that is something you want to utilize. So again, if it's a training to give those tools and how to have tough conversations, do that. But really look at everyone in the organization as a leader in this type of work, and teach them all how to have the ability and the courage, as you say, to be able to call that behavior out. What do you think?
I think that a situation where I found a way to make a difference there also was bringing all the employees into that conversation, having them, come up, whether it was through a bit of a focus group or a survey, trying to find out what is the culture that they're looking to work towards. Like, where will they thrive? What are those characteristics that make them want to come to work, that make them want to be a part of their team, and then having that group come up with some of those group norms so that, over and above all the things that you said, I think it's helpful when you can bring the whole team in, and to your point, everyone's a leader, to say, these are our group norms. This is how these are our rules of engagement for how we're going to dialogue with each other. And the ones we came up with in the situation I'm thinking about included things like, being respectful, not interrupting each other, not using microaggressions, but it also, included things like the desire that if I need something to share, I'm going to share it with the person, not with other people. Which
Right.
Gossip is
Right.
is one of those things. And I'm not saying that particular intervention solved all the problems, but it gave that team something to point to, that when someone was being disrespectful or uncivil or kind of violating those group norms, they could point to that as a reminder. Remember, these are the things we came up with. And so it allowed people something to lean on to that they all agreed to. And so sometimes I think it's helpful to pull everybody into that conversation a little bit.
Absolutely.
One of the tools I've found helpful is to use examples of how incivility as develop scenarios for training sessions so that everyone is hearing the same message, that this is not okay. And Jennifer, you talked about microaggressions. Examples of those would be helpful.
I think, and we should probably give a definition for those who are like, what do you mean? I mean, and I don't have I'm not going to use the standard definition, but an example can be, and it's why that can also be, an example of incivility. It's when you have those little digs that get at someone based on often a characteristic around the diverse skills and abilities they bring. And so microaggressions can be, for example, in a meeting where you're always interrupting when a woman talks, or when you're always discounting certain people, or when you make, kind of snide comments about someone's hairstyle. They can seem harmless on the surface, but there's usually a bit of a hidden level of incivility in there, that the person kind of, either they're aware or they're not aware, but over time, they start to erode that person, and that person feels less valued. And those are things that also have to be called out.
And when you see that there are people who were speaking out, and all of a sudden in the meetings they're silent, then what is that about? Is that something that you should pull that person aside and say, how are things going for you? As Nina had mentioned, having the conversations. so that people are able to say, yeah, didn't feel good to me, and I don't want to have that happen again.
Absolutely, because when you get to a point when you had people who were speaking up who are no longer, that means that they no longer feel safe. And so, absolutely, you need to pull that person aside and kind of ask the questions and see what's going on. I thought of something based on what we were just talking about. Everyone's a leader, and so giving everyone the skills. Oftentimes, and we know this based on the work we've done in organizations, people fear speaking up to their leaders by title. How do we encourage, reinforce, teach employees who may be line level staff who see incivility in their managers, leaders? How do we instill in them sort of this courage, as you said, to have those tough conversations or manage up, as you will? How do we do that?
Well, I think one of the things we do, I truly believe that courage is in short supply.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody's courageous on the computer,
Oh, a lot of keyboard warriors.
but not person to person.
And so find other people within the group who are willing to be your partner in speaking up.
Mhm.
So you're not the only one who is speaking up. Or to find a time to ask the leader, could we have a conversation about something that I was really concerned about happening in our meetings?
That's good.
And I do think, Jen, you mentioned like the team norms. I think there, to some extent, when we all sign up with an organization, we're signing up for whatever those standards are. And then within the team, when we have agreed upon this is, our rules of engagement, being able to bring even the leaders into that becomes equally important.
Yeah.
Because leadership, as we all know, it's not about do as I say, but it's me inspiring you. It's the inspiration of like the positive energy that we share as a team. And so if I'm an effective leader, I should also be subscribing to what those team norms are.
Absolutely.
So then it doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, if I go talk to my leader about what they just said, I'm, halfway out the door with a pink slip. No, if I'm a good leader, I'm going to sit down and say, I understand, because these are the things that we agreed to as a team.
Agreed.
So
And
let's-
sometimes just acknowledging, oh, I didn't really realize what I did, and I appreciate your coming to me, talking with me about it. And I know there are people who would appreciate it and who would say, oh, won't happen again.
Can I add something?
Yes.
So I think you all gave really good examples. But unfortunately, I'm going to
That's
reel
where
it
I
in
was
and be
going.
real.
That's where I was going.
Not all leaders are
That's
great.
where I was going.
And so I think, I think we all, as adults working in the workplace, we have sometimes decisions to make. Like, is this the
Yes,
organization
yes.
for me?
Yeah.
Now, there are leaders out there. It's not that they're horrible, but sometimes they need a little coaching and managing up. And so, what I would say is, if you feel like you have an opportunity there, it may be something as an employee you have to work on with that leader. And so what I would say is like start by building a relationship first. Like
Yes.
don't go in
Right.
second week on the job, I got some feedback for you. And for some leaders, they'll take that well, and they are
Right.
they're strong, and they are adapt, and they want that feedback. Others will be like, well, who do you think you are?
Exactly.
So in those scenarios, you gotta have a little bit of organizational savvy to figure out where you are with your relationship. So I would say in those situations, start building a relationship with the leader, letting them know I'm on your side. I want to be part of your team. I want to do well. I want to make you shine. Like I want to be part of this. Start to get to know them,
Yep.
and that's where you can start to entertain those additional questions, like. If I ever have feedback for you, is that something you feel, am I able to share that with you? And kind of start to feel them out. And if they say yes, then that gives you the open door to try it. And of course, you've got to be adept at your communication skills around how you give that feedback,
Absolutely.
making sure it's factual and timely, and you're not making judgments and assumptions and all those good things. and see how it goes. If it doesn't go well, you've kind of got an answer around the leadership capabilities of your leader,
Yeah.
which that's not always on you to solve. That's
True.
the organization,
True.
and you may have resources in your own organization to help solve that. But um, unfortunately, people are going to work for leaders who won't take feedback, who won't check in with you, who maybe aren't interested in you, and maybe they shouldn't be in leadership.
Right.
And so, people just have to be realistic that those scenarios do exist in the workplace.
Great advice. Great examples. We still have people in our audience who will say, I'm still not going to do that. So let's put our HR hats on for this answer. What advice would you give employees who either witness or experience incivility, how they can advocate for themselves or others when they fear retaliation? What advice would you give to employees in those situations?
My hope would be that there are systems in place where people can report through, what their experience is. And as an HR professional, that is the one thing that I feel like we can all proudly say, representing that neutral body and really being able to help individuals navigate through their situation, explaining what resources are available to them. And hopefully coaching them to, garner some of the skills that we talked about today. But every organization should have some system in place to say things aren't going right and I can't go talk to this leader. I need to send my email or write my letter, talk to my leader's upline. So hopefully those are resources that are available.
Some people find journaling to be an important tool for thinking about what has gone on in our environment that doesn't feel right. And if you are able to factually record what has happened that doesn't make it a comfortable place to be, that may be one of the ways to begin to work it out. My daughter, I have a daughter who has books and books of journals because that has been a tool over her 20-something years of working as a manager to find that it's very therapeutic to put your own words down, but to then look back and see how much of this do I own versus how much actually is something I have nothing to do with, but I've got to speak about it.
Dr. Mary, you just said saying that reminded me of a book that you gave me, which was Walk a Day in My Shoes. And very impactful as a leader. So, plug as a leader, you never can stop growing. And as an individual contributor, sometimes you have to take that different perspective.
But that's sometimes the frustrating thing that we see in organizations where there are some leaders who think they've arrived, that they've made it, and they no longer
I'm good.
need to continue on that journey, right? But this is proof positive that as leaders, we always need to continue growing and learning, and it doesn't stop. It's a journey. It's not a destination. What about you? What sorts of things from an HR perspective?
Two things I love what you said, Nina. That organizations, you're right. You need to have other systems in place. Maybe do you do surveys? Do you have a hotline, or can people access someone in human resources to talk to? Do you have a process for going up an organizational chart when things? So you need to set the stage for that and let employees know that these are the resources that are available to them. This is what you do. If you hear something, if you experience this, these are all your options. And publicize that. It shouldn't be just a secret.
Right.
I love what you said around journaling, which I also will call documentation. Working in HR.
Yeah.
If it's not documented, it didn't happen. So documentation can be really helpful. But what I really love about what you said is that the idea that we should all think about what piece of it we own. Because I think whether no matter what role you are in an organization, a leader, a frontline employee, an experienced employee, a senior employee, all those things, sometimes you go through something and you think, this was done to me. this person is terrible. I'm completely the victim. And occasionally, if you can step back and look at it, there could be a piece of it you own, you know.
Sure.
Oftentimes, right?
Yes,
You know,
yes.
there's a piece that we all own in that. So I love that. And so, in addition, what I would say is sometimes we all need a buddy, or, you know, like they always say, do you have a friend at work? But you need someone who's honest that you can talk to. And if you have someone who's truly honest, they're on your side, but they're willing to be honest. When you explain that situation to them, they might be willing to say, yeah, you know what, that wasn't right, but I kind of see where, you know, maybe you played a role in it. And so it's always helpful if we have someone who is willing to give us that feedback too, along with helping us navigate where we're running into obstacles in our organizations.
Absolutely. And just one more plug for our favorite D word, documentation. Make sure it's specific, right? I've seen a lot of documentation where it's just not enough meat
Right.
there, if you will.
Dates,
times, anybody who can corroborate,
Quotes.
just all the things,
All the
right?
things.
So important. I want to pivot just a little bit. And Nina, you brought this up earlier when we were talking about microaggressions and diversity and equity and inclusion. I wonder what your thoughts are. We've seen sort of this big box HR organization remove the word equity from their all of their materials, indicating the word makes people feel uncomfortable. What are your thoughts about that, and how does that align with civility and incivility in the workplace?
Go ahead, Doctor.
I love pass on that one to come back.
Well, I think part of it's that thing about courage being in short supply.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're going to do what they think the bottom line wants to have happen. And so and it's so interesting how one company sees another company doing something, and all of a sudden it becomes a norm. And it's like, what is going on here that people don't have courage to stand up and to say, we stand for this, and we will continue to have equity as one of our values.
It's really interesting. Sorry, Jen. It's really interesting to me, and we are in 2025, so we and our audience hopefully are well aware of what's happening right now in this country. It's really interesting how you can not take the word inclusion and align that with civility, right? And how people are treating each other in the workplace, and so it's challenging, I think, to see how certain words have been weaponized. And people really don't understand the true meaning of even diversity or inclusion or equity, and how now it's turning into something that it isn't, when really what we're talking about is how we treat each other.
Absolutely.
Not just in the workplace, but in life in general. And it's frustrating and sad, but the work continues.
Absolutely.
Right? What are your thoughts, Jen?
I would say organizations that are dropping it probably never had it anyway. So
Good
go ahead and
point.
drop it.
Good point.
But, you know, when you talk about equity, it's really interesting because what you said earlier around treat other people how they would like to be treated, that's what equity is. It's meeting people where they are.
Right.
And what's wrong with that? It's
Right.
not, again, I think people have pulled it into that us versus them,
Yes.
winners and losers box, and it's not about that. It's about giving people the tools they need to do what they need to do.
Absolutely.
I don't think anybody would argue that there's a problem when you're trying to be equitable, when you hire someone who maybe they need a special device to help them read their computer screen because they have a vision impairment. That's equity. So should we not be trying to give people the tools they need? Should we give everybody the same size shoes because everybody's got to be equal, so you all get a 9 wide? Doesn't matter if you wear a 6 medium.
Right?
That's equity, to give
Right.
people the size shoe you need to do your job. So I think people are just using it as a weapon, and I think organizations that are dropping it, instead of using that as a teaching moment and having the courage to explain really what it is, they weren't invested in it anyway, and they weren't doing the work anyway, and it's unfortunate. But that's kind of where I am, and I could probably talk about this for a long time. So
We
I'm
could.
like, oh.
It's Dr.
That's
Mary's
okay.
point of, one company does it, now you see all these companies doing it, removing,
Mhm.
and it's now very interesting to see the backlash from the backlash, right? And we're just in this space of just lack of understanding and lack of willingness to be courageous and have the conversation on how we can just be accepting of all. And to your point, it really was never about the people, right?
Right.
I think I am careful when we talk about equity, because part of that means that you have to understand why the words even exist. And so when we simply just respect a human for a human, regardless of all the things, we wouldn't even need the word, right? But it's at the point that we say, I believe that X or Y is superior, that we have to talk about that. And so in the workplace, it's about can it be about the talent? Does it have to be about what my hair looked like?
Right.
And unfortunately, I feel like we took it back like 50 years, y'all, and I wasn't even around 50 years ago.
Or if not more, right? To your point, Jen, we could sit here and talk about this all day, because it is a topic that I think every day we're seeing something new happening because of it, and so maybe that's our next table talk question. Any closing thoughts on this issue, civility versus incivility, and what we can do in our organizations?
I think for me, from my perspective, I think of one word, and that's grace. It's really the word grace is when I do something, I want somebody to give me grace. But when something is done to me, I want to take it to the letter of the law.
Yeah.
And so if we can root in grace for all things, I think it starts to dispel and starts to break down this construct of incivility, and how we just interact with each other as a human race.
One of the things I think about is about fear, and people are feeling fear that they no longer are at the top of whatever the organization or the issue is. They've been caught less than top notch, and so here we've got to find someone to put on the bottom. And so here is a way to make it something that it isn't, and therefore you end up with people making up stuff that has nothing to do with the reality of what needs to happen to make people feel safe, feel valued in the organization. So it's interesting how this stuff seems to be cyclical. And so, we thought we'd gotten past this. Well, we haven't, because this fear thing keeps popping up.
History repeats itself. I
It sure
think
does.
that's what we've all learned. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people don't know history. And so I think wherever we can encourage people to read and have critical thinking skills and not take things for face value. Oh, I heard it on social media, so it must be true. I think we've got to instill that in people. But as far as leaders and HR professionals, I think we've just got to keep focus on the human element, meeting people where they are, not turning people into things, and weaponizing and making things about winners and losers. And I think it's hard work. So I don't think we should sugarcoat it. So we have to acknowledge that and really be willing to step into it, and stay firm though on our core values and the things that are important to our organizations. And sometimes it's working through people one at a time. you know, if you can work with one person who wasn't giving grace and get them to see a different way, be more empathetic, you know, maybe you've made a difference, and that stuff starts to catch. And I have to believe, like you said, things are cyclical. We're going through another cycle. So how do we help navigate our organizations and our teams through this cycle until we come out, you know, again on that other side?
Just the other day, I was having a conversation with a friend where I said, it feels like at work, at home, at church, people are snapping at each other all the time, and patience is short, and people are just, part of it is because of the fear and the stress, because of everything that's going on, but they're not really self-aware, noticing that they're snapping at their coworkers and whatnot. So I love your word of grace. But I also want to challenge all of us and leaders to, you know, lean into our strength as leaders, calling it out, but also all of us to just lead from a space of humility, right? And understand that none of us knows what the other person is going through in life. And, you know, who we are at home, we're that at work. So we brought whatever issues we have in life to work as well. So just lead not only with grace, but that humility as well. Yeah. Thank you so much, ladies. That was an awesome conversation. Really appreciate all of your thoughts, and we appreciate you, our audience, for tuning in to the HR Leadership Collective's first Table Talk. We look forward to seeing you at the next one. Take care.
Yeah.